New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Spinward Operations Area, System The Last Resort, Zenith Jump Point, Jump Ship Rabbit's Foot, November 11th, 3152. With every passing second, the pressure in the bridge of the Rabbit's Foot increased. It was a relief when the glowing holographic representations of the Kikumaru and the Nara flickered back into existence over the holotable. However, that relief was dashed when the Eulalia didn't join them. "Please send a warning to the Eulalia. We don't know when the interference will return," Rin said to Corporal Miri, who quickly nodded and turned back to her console. The swirling dance of dropships and aerofighters around the Combine jump ships would have been quite beautiful if they weren't waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mary turned back to Rin, and it was obvious from the look on her face that she had bad news to share. She stuttered slightly as she started to say, "The Eulalia is under attack at the spaceport. They're trying to fall back. The Combine ships left them behind." Rin furrowed her brow and sighed. The pressure of the growing headache between her eyes doubled. Turning away from Miri and while rubbing her temple, Rin responded, "Let them know that we need them back as soon as possible. Every second counts." Over the comlink, Rin pulled up Washi and Noel, who were circling the Rabbit's Foot in their coraxes. "Keep an eye out for that jump ship. If the comms go down again, you know the plan," she said with some trepidation concerning sending the two young pilots into harm's way. "Aft, Captain," they both answered in near unison. Then moments later, Noel spoke. "Captain, if I do not return, please report that I died honorably in service to the mission." "Of course, but that won't happen. You are Ravens. No periphery pirate is going to get the jump on you," Rin said as she blinked away a suddenly watery eye. "Aft, Captain." Rin looked again at the holotable and said a silent prayer for Cal and the others to make it back in one piece. Planet The Last Resort 4, LR Spaceport, November 11th, 3152. Max gritted his teeth and tried every trick he knew to get the Axeman to stand. The best he could accomplish was to slowly drag the mech with its functioning arm and leg toward the Eulalia. Every warning light on his console was in competition to flash the most intensely red. The light engine was compromised and performing at just 25% efficiency. The mech was dying, but the last thing he wanted was to leave it behind. There had to be time to get to the dropship. Another pull on the mech's arm dragged the Axeman another few meters closer to the ship and the promise of covering fire. The Eulalia was employing its lasers and autocannon, which was keeping the infantry and light vehicles from venturing too close. However, its armor plating was showing the gradual ablation from the light arm's fire and occasional missile strike. Max dragged his mech another few meters along the ferrocrete and caught a glimpse of Tenika's king crab stalking in the distance. He felt a wave of relief, though the mech was looking worse for wear. Finally reaching the ramp of the Eulalia, Max pulled hard on the control sticks and pushed the pedals while grinding his teeth in order to pull the mech up onto it, eventually ending up inside. While the battle raged around the dropship, he was able to finally get his mech up against the gantry and shut it down. "You're done for now, ma'am," he said with a heavy sigh. He took 1 second to bask in the relief before unclasping the harness and shoving the cockpit hatch open. Laser rifle over his shoulder, Max carefully crawled down the remains of his beloved mech, trying not to think about the repair bill if they managed to survive this. Tenika growled as she stomped the king crab in an arc around the berserker, which was moving closer like a jungle cat stalking its prey. The king crab's rear armor was breached in several locations, and Tenika knew that the next shot from the Jenner or the Calliope would be enough to hit something vital deep inside her mech. Still, she couldn't turn away from the berserker, which was methodically firing its medium lasers into the king crab's thick front plate. Firing her PPCs one last time as Gia's orange mech crossed into the minimum range, the shots blasted away the garish paint and several tons of armor which burned and melted down the berserker's torso and fell to the tarmac below. Still, it charged forward. "Shut down your mech and perhaps we can find a place for you here. How are you at waiting tables?" Gia laughed into the open comlink. Tenika was tempted to respond, but she glanced down at the inked eagle on her arm, which reminded her of Vasil's advice. "Fight like you've already won," Tenika said to herself as she aimed and fired both of her medium lasers and light autocannon into the torso of the berserker, all while knowing that the next shot from the Jenner from behind could be the last. At this point, most of the soldiers were holding back, as if waiting for the outcome of this gladiatorial combat between the gigantic war machines. The sounds of machine gun fire and mortar fire started to die down. Braced for that strike against her internal structure, the shot didn't come. Several seconds passed, then several more. As she continued to back away from the Berserker, the Jenner came into view. It was laying as if it were a tossed ragdoll. Tenica glanced down at it, somewhat confused as it looked almost entirely undamaged except for a circular charred hole through the cockpit hatch. Standing a few dozen meters away was the Calliope, its arm still extended from its shot into the light mech. Tenica opened the direct link with it and said, "Akif, is that you?" The response was hesitant and dripped with guilt when he said, "It didn't seem right. I'm sorry." Any opportunity for conversation was cut off by Gia's Berserker, which had finally closed the distance with the king crab. The mech's massive hatchet lashed out and caught a glancing blow against the king crab's clawed arm. Tenica refocused and swung her own arm out, pushing the Berserker's hatchet away while punching forward with the other arm. The crunching sound of the armored claw smashing into the smoldering armor plates spread across the spaceport and into the surrounding city. "Your Combine masters have abandoned you," Gia grunted into the open comlink. Tenica roared in return, "We have no masters," and slammed her mech's right arm into the chest of the Berserker again, forcing it down to a knee. The king crab's left arm stopped responding, and then when she glanced at it, she could see the hatchet had sheared it completely at the elbow. Both mechs were in shambles. More and more armor plating was buckled, burned, and melted into slag as they hammered at each other. "Tenica, I'm almost there!" Olivia's voice sounded far away as Tenica's head pounded from the constant shaking, shuddering, and heat within the cockpit. Stalking around them, Akif was racked with guilt and indecision. Putting a plasma rifle shot into Lorm's cockpit to save Tenica was one thing. He didn't even like the guy, but he still felt something for Gia, even if she had rejected him. "Gia, end this. You don't have to destroy them, just let them go," he pleaded into the LR comlink. "Shut your mouth. I'll deal with you in a minute." Gia's strained voice revealed a desperate situation she was in while still grappling with the king crab. Akif looked at Tenica's king crab and then down at the HUD. His Calliope was starting to take small arms fire from the soldiers, and he had to keep moving to avoid the occasional shoulder pack SRM or PPC shot. Clearly word had spread about his murder of Lorm. "So be it," he said as he ran up to the grappling assault mechs. Akif saw the damaged right leg of the Berserker and took careful aim. The plasma rifle shot hit true, mid-calf, and the extremely bright shot of plasmatic fire burned through the already charred armor. Firing his medium pulse lasers a few moments later, they cut into the assault mech's internal structure, severing the connections between knee and foot. Tenica's mech was in trouble. The autocannons were both jammed or destroyed, her lasers were malfunctioning from being pushed beyond their safety limits, and her left arm now rested on the ferrocrete. Gia's Berserker raised its hatchet high, but instead of bringing it down on Tenica's cockpit, the mech collapsed as if it had a rug pulled out from under it. Dust billowed as the charred orange battle mech crashed to the ground. Suddenly, Tenica was free from the grasp of the machine. Looking down, the Berserker was already trying to rise. "Nope, you're done," Tenica said as she stepped forward, placing the king crab's foot over the left knee of Gia's mech. Leaning the mech forward, the lateral pressure on the mech's knee bent and snapped the limb at an unnatural angle, and ended Gia's attempt to stand her mech. "You're never going to leave this system without my consent. Without word from me, the Skyfire will turn your jump ships to scrap," Gia groaned into the open comlink. Tenica fought the urge to stomp on the mech's cockpit just to put an end to Gia's nonsense. Instead, she put even more weight on the knee, ruining the actuator while saying, "Shut your mech down. Call off your forces." "You know, Tenica makes a good point," Olivia added to the open link as the Thunderbolt came to a stop next to the king crab. The Berserker stopped moving entirely. Gradually, the last of the light arms fire stopped. After nearly an hour of consistent firing, the silence that descended over the spaceport was disturbing. System The Last Resort, Zenith Jump Point, Jump Ship Rabbit's Foot, November 11th, 3152. Rin furrowed her brow and let out a long sigh as she took in the view of the two Combine dropships, now well on their way to a return trip to the jump point without the Eulalia. Slowly turning her head, she looked at Miri and said, "Can you please notify Captain Sino that I would like to talk to him?" "Aft Captain," Miri said. After a few minutes, Miri turned and stated, "Captain Sino is not with them. He was apparently killed in an ambush along with a significant number of the Combine infantry. We're also getting word from the Eulalia. It's Cal, I mean Lieutenant Levitt. He says that everyone in the NEC team is safe, but beat up pretty bad. They'll be lifting off in a few hours," Miri added a few moments later. "Oh, thank goodness," Rin said, gripping the edge of the holotable. "Let them know we need them on their way back as soon as possible. The Last Resort's jump ship could return at any moment. If we're lucky, we'll be gone by the time it does," Rin said, knowing that it was extremely unlikely that the Eulalia would make it back in time. Still, it felt good to say out loud as if it were possible. She turned and walked to the bridge doorway, pausing for long enough to say, "I need a few minutes, Corporal. You have the helm." "Aft, Captain," Mary responded. Stepping into her cabin and closing the door, Rin shut her eyes and leaned against the cool steel. The cumulative pressure from the last few days hitting like a rogue wave. Sure, the NEC team seemed to be out of danger, but it had only been through 1,000 moments of happenstance. The thought of losing Cal, Olivia, and the others reminded her of May and Ariana and how easily it could all go wrong. She slid down to the floor with her head in her hands. Banishing the memories was impossible, and she was so very tired. Planet, The Last Resort 4, LR Spaceport, November 11th, 3152. A tense peace settled in around the LR Spaceport as Cal and the others prepared the Eulalia for liftoff. It was still dark, but dawn was rapidly approaching. Many of the tanks, vehicles, and soldiers waited at a distance, watching with trepidation as Gia stood at the entrance of the dropship's hold. Her hands were bound to the ship behind her, and it was the first time Cal had seen her look less than perfectly confident. That was reassuring. He walked up next to her with a mug of coffee in his hand, looking out at the crew of technicians connecting the arm of the king crab to a hauler. After sipping from the mug, he glanced over at Gia, who gave him a suspicious side-eye look in return. "I think you need to come with us to the jump point to make sure your friends on the Skyfire behave themselves," Cal said. Gia said nothing for a few seconds and instead stared off into the distance. Eventually, she replied, "You could always just stay. I could use a king regent." Cal nodded, smiled, and took another drink from his mug. He imagined himself in a crown for a moment and chuckled. "No, I don't think I'm cut out for that, but I appreciate the offer," he said. Vasil and the remaining Combine battle-armored soldiers moved from the cover of the dropship's landing struts to cover the arrival of the flatbed mover carrying the king crab's arm. The machine's engine strained as it slowly began to climb the ramp. They had formed a silent alliance in the past few hours as Vasil went out of his way to cover them as they returned Captain Sino's body to the ship. "Taking me with you is no guarantee of safety. Guider Flores may fire on you thinking it's a kidnapping. She would not be too broken up if I died in the conflagration," Gia said. Cal smiled and finished off the rest of his coffee in the mug before saying, "Yeah, that's a possibility, but you're still a nice bargaining chip, and we can't exactly leave you behind to enjoy a successful coup. That wouldn't be right." "So you leave behind a power vacuum? When has that ever ended well?" Gia retorted. Cal nodded and said, "That's up to the people here to sort out. All we can do is offer them the chance to choose the right path. We can't make that choice for them." Gia rolled her eyes as Cal turned and walked back into the hold where the team was getting the mechs packed up for the flight. Quarters were tight due to Akif's calliope being crammed into a makeshift gantry. The unexpected ally was sitting at the mech's foot, looking uncomfortable. Cal kept his distance as Tenica and Olivia headed Akif's way. The Mechwarriors could sort things out without him. He stuffed the empty mug into his jacket pocket and began the long trek up the ladder to the Eulalia's cockpit. "Hey, you doing all right?" Olivia asked as the Mechwarriors reached Akif. He looked up and quickly tried to hide the guilty look on his face with a smile. He even ran his hand through his dark hair in a translucent act of feigned bravado. "I'm great. It's good to see you both again," Akif responded. Olivia gave Tenica a look before Tenica said, "I wanted to thank you. You saved my butt out there, and you didn't have to. You could have gone a different way." Akif shook his head briefly and said, "I couldn't shoot you in the back. Your mech is too pretty. Plus, this place is a bit of a bore. There aren't any good card players out here to offer me a challenge." Tenica nodded and smiled slightly, knowing this was about as close to a "you're welcome" as they were going to get from Akif. Olivia slid her hand over his shoulder and said, "Come meet Max. I think you two are going to get along like pulse lasers and heat sinks." They headed off in Max's direction, and Tenica turned on her heels to walk toward Vasil. He was now standing guard next to Gia as the techs used the truck's crane to unload the king crab's arm. Walking up to his other side, she reached out and tapped her fingers over the barrel of the micropulse laser that made up his right arm. "Hey, big guy. You doing okay?" she asked, looking up at his armored visor. Always the professional, he didn't move from his sentry pose. The elemental's external speaker crackled to life, and Vasil said, I'm glad you are well. I am sorry I was not able to get back here in time to help. You did your part, and everyone came home. That's what matters, Tenica responded. Gia leaned forward with a curious look on her face before rolling her eyes again and saying nothing. I'm going to make sure this arm is secure. Last thing we need is a darn thing bouncing around during liftoff. You owe me a big hug after we lift off, Tenica said as she tapped his arm again and stomped off into the cargo bay. You know she likes you, right? Gia said with a smirk before continuing. I mean, it's obvious, but I've heard you clanners aren't good with genuine human emotions. Vasile remained motionless in his armor, but responded, You tried to kill her, and everyone on this ship. If I was not good with genuine human emotions, you would be in several pieces on the Ferrocrete. Gia chuckled and said, Promises, promises. At least you know how to flirt. Vasile said nothing. Instead, he looked out into the distant sunrise. End Part 12. That's it for this week, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let the YouTube algorithm know by hitting all the buttons. You know how this works. Big thank you to those who are sticking with the story. Tying all these story elements together in a way that makes sense to more than just my scattered brain has been wild. If you enjoy this fiction, remember that becoming a channel member is a great way to support the creation of new BattleTech content, both with original fiction and the always fun lore stuff. The nonsense must flow. Until we meet again, take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.